Hello, if you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter, the way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all that black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. "Up and at 'em, cowpoke," he called in that mocking tone. "Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a..." "Billy," Warden Taft silenced him with a word. "If you can't act like a professional, you're going to have to sit this one out." Billy paused and licked his chapped lips. "Naw," he muttered, "this a show I can't miss." Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked him to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done, or act scared of what's coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him, get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls, well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it struck a chord. We all watched him fry, the warden, his closest men, the thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections, the prison physician, the families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I'd noticed at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next morning, we came into work to see the whites of those beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. "Good morning, sirs," he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it, I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. You're supposed to be..." "I don't know what you mean, sir." He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. "You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir, but you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me?" Me and Taft looked at each other. We both had the exact same question on our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll into the morgue last night? Jesus Christ. Taft gagged when he pulled back the cadaver cover, stumbling away. "It's Billy." I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll be forever haunted by the sight of my friend lying there on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling, open wide as if he'd spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was that poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taft were out on our ears, and they would have prosecuted us too, but that would have required admitting it ever happened. But I just could never wrap my head around it. Of those dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed we were strapping a guard to the chair, not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it, at least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. "I understand you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation. Oh, at 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time." There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, the professionalism had melted away, replaced with a baffled anxiety. "And well, it didn't work." I blinked. "It didn't what?" There came a long sigh. "Perhaps it'd be best if you saw for yourself." And just like that, me and Taft had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18th, 1999. Unofficially, they tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy to pretend to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the CO who'd flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath his skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickering, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. It was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak with anybody but the COs who'd once cared for him. Being walked into that interrogation room almost made me feel like I, myself, was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in, like he'd been sat there motionless, waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers and psychos before and showed no hint of fear. But how could I not now, sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them? Glass. Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. I had thought you'd abandon me. I winced. Number no, Glass. I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I'm here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay, Glass, I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer. I didn't, he replied. It did. The thing standing behind you, I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. Glass, please, let's take this seriously, I replied. I've always treated you with respect, haven't I? You've never had any problems with me. Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you. Oh, you here all believe that death is a punishment. There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. It's not, it's freedom, the only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners while leaving me behind. With all of your machines and your science and your knowledge, surely you can find a way, if anyone. My throat felt suddenly dry. I had to take a sip of the water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. We're trying our best, Glass, but you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you. He moved for the first time, leaning in so slow as to be almost imperceptible. It won't let me die. And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear, my heart stopped beating and my blood froze in place in my veins. And it all felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once mocked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. I couldn't think. I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air and my vision blurred and my thoughts melded together. All I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine. Those infinite fathoms of darkness, that Stygian sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the blackness of his iris, and the eyes of things waiting a million leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then and come storming into the room. Later, they showed me the tapes from the security camera. There'd been nothing behind me, nothing placing its thin hand upon my shoulder, nothing at all. On May 7th, 2001, Glass was set to be executed for the third time, via hanging or so I heard, in some government black site somewhere far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing glasses of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate, really because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez? I shook my head and he sighed. Back in '63, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up, burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice one less hooker on the corner of 5th Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters. Even the ones we try and cast aside. Everybody's got people who love them and childhood memories and all that. Everybody deserves justice, no matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force, got the case reopened, found the guy, and I watched him fry, and I like to imagine she was there watching too as he burned. There was a tense moment, and then a chuckle. Of course, after that bullet to the hip in '71, I couldn't walk walk the beat anymore, but I've been just as happy here. Watching justice be served, it makes me feel like there's some kind of karmic order to the world. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old, wrinkled, tired eyes, he said it. I've thought about it, and if Glass doesn't die tonight, I'm finally going to retire, Mendez, he confessed. After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in a world where a monster like that is just beyond justice? I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? He'll die, sir, I promised. It'll work this time, it has to. But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward. His eyes. He stared at my expression as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things in his eyes. Haven't you seen them? And at that moment, Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable, I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed, and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging, I realized, and with wide, horrified eyes, the same as Billy's had been, he silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first, I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized it was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief, but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue, and even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All the while, I screamed myself hoarse. Help, somebody please, Jesus Christ, we need help in here. But nobody came, and all of a sudden, some unseen force seemed to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks, but I was so startled I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me, and his body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side at almost a 90-degree angle, eyes wide, round and bloated tongue hanging from dry lips. And then whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my coworkers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taft was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taft. I wanted out. We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard. But the agents in the sharp suits made one thing clear. If I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find a Joseph Glass that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black, or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of outer darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass. No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. I have some questions I'm supposed to ask you. Is that okay? Silence. I take a deep breath. How old are you, Glass? I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. I am old, child. His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison, and all were equally ancient. Older than you could possibly know. Older than this nation, and older even than the empire that once bore it. I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. Why did you do what you did to those girls? Just so I could feel something again, he whispered. Anything. Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt, remorse? You ask that of me. Me, who has watched empires rise and fall. He almost sounded amused. Does time feel remorse? For time has killed far more than I. But mankind is like the Hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by essentially identical stock and in greater numbers. And then they will die and be replaced. And so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I, myself, covet? Only the dead are given leave of the cycle. It is a blessing. And suddenly he stood from his chair as if he'd never been restrained at all. A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendez. I stared up at him in disbelief. What? How did you? But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling over the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotions I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt, betrayal. And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface. You owe me a death. Make good on your word. Pay your debt. I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust, but he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm my way out of his impossible grip. I won't. Get off of me, you sick bastard. Do it. Pay me what you owe. It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands around his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead I could just feel that grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as my lungs burned for air. Yet I kept pressing harder and harder, as if hoping I might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And then those terrible hands grasped my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago. And every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood, and it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room and have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements, and then the both of us just sit there staring at each other without speaking, without moving, without blinking, for an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state, and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness had ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday's trash. Don't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I'd gotten lucky, that my nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public records, and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been unpersoned, if indeed he could ever be called a person at all, but they're still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why. Maybe it's for research. I'm sure the US military would love to find the secret to making its men as unkillable as Glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3rd, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song, when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass, and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23rd, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred, his bloodstream polluted with pavulon and potassium chloride. It's been years since I've isolated myself from everyone I knew, hermiting away in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently, he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied utterly despite no signs of a struggle. God knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're trying by now. He's not gonna let me walk away from this, not while I still owe him a debt, but I've been doing some research too. Research into those untold legions of things I witnessed staring up from that blackened sea in Glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know, practiced rites, assembled tools, ingredients, and I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the second between every turn on our way to the black site, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every entry point. Maybe I'm slipping into madness, or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to the horror, to finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing. I have to pay what I owe, even if it kills me. Justin and I had been together for 10 years, married for 6. I'd been with him for my whole adult life. We'd been dating since I was 17 and he was 18. I always thought he was my soulmate, the man I wanted to grow old with. Turns out I was wrong. I was devastated when I found out. Yes, Justin had been staying out later than usual, and his explanations were usually flimsy at best. I'm not stupid. I had my suspicions, but I think I just really didn't want to come to terms with the fact that my husband was seeing another woman. Honestly, I might have gone years without discovering the truth, but Justin got sloppy. Welcome home, honey. Fun night out with the guys after work again? Justin grumbled, brushing past me. I made dinner if you're hungry, beef tips and rice. I know it's one of your favorites. 8 at the bar, I'm gonna bed, he muttered, steadying himself against the wall before woozily clomping up the stairs. My heart sank. Nights like those were becoming more and more frequent. I loved my husband. All I wanted was to spend a little quality time with him after a long day at work, but he couldn't even spare me a few minutes. I glanced up at him as he lumbered up the steps, a tear trickling down my cheek. In an instant, any sadness that I felt was replaced with burning rage, because when Justin passed underneath the overhead light, I saw what appeared to be a hickey on the side of his neck. A cocktail of emotions swirled within me. Despair, resentment, betrayal, they all hit me like a ton of bricks. I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. I mean, who would? The man I had been head over heels for all that time had stabbed me in the back. I was in disbelief. I stumbled to the kitchen, pulling out a chair before I could collapse. I stared into space, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I sat there for a long time, deep in thought. After a while, I felt numb, like my entire personality had been flushed down the drain, leaving nothing but an empty husk. Then a thought flashed across my mind. I'd been mistaken. That had to be it, just a mere trick of the light. It was a pretty dimly lit hallway after all. Whatever the case, I had to know. I tiptoed upstairs, abandoning my dinner. I crept up to our room as quiet as a church mouse before lightly pushing open the bedroom door. Justin was fast asleep. I didn't waste any time. I rushed across the room, careful to avoid any squeaky floorboards, and I inspected Justin's neck. His snores grew louder as I approached. He always was a heavy sleeper. I cursed when I got a closer look. Justin was sleeping on his side, and I was not going to try to roll him over. I glanced around, searching for anything that might provide concrete evidence. My eyes fell to the bedside table. Bingo. I snatched Justin's phone from his charger. I held my breath as I pressed his meaty thumb onto the screen to unlock it. I grinned, feeling a rush of exhilaration as I achieved my goal. What, huh? I froze. Justin groggily opened his eyes a sliver as my hand hovered over him. My blood turned to ice, and I prayed with all my might that my husband would just go back to sleep. To my immense shock, my prayers were answered. Justin mumbled incoherently under his breath before grabbing a fistful of covers and nodding off. I'd escaped by the skin of my teeth. I had to be more careful. The first thing I did was check Justin's texts. I immediately saw a woman's name I didn't recognize. My heart shattered when I read the messages. Hey baby, last night was incredible. See you again after work today. You're right, I wish you never had to leave. What about that wife of yours though? Won't she get suspicious? Her, not a chance. Even if she does find out, she won't leave. I could murder a baby in front of her and she'd still think I was a saint. A deep-seated rage bubbled within me. Did Justin really think that little of me? He clearly saw me as nothing more than a spineless, codependent pushover. Well, I'd show him. I screenshotted the evidence, scrolling through dozens of nude photos that I hadn't taken, and sent everything to my number. I deleted any proof of my snooping, then replaced Justin's phone on the charger. I stormed out of the room, grabbing my keys as I went. I made it halfway across the living room when the realization hit me. I had nowhere to go. All my family lived 7 hours away, it was too late to book a decent hotel, and I really didn't want to drag any of my friends into my drama. Not yet, at least. That left me with one option. I had to sleep on the couch. I plopped down onto the sofa and sighed. I didn't want to have to confront it, but I knew what I had to do. In the morning, I was going to find a lawyer and start the divorce process. The thought alone was enough to break me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I cried like a baby, silently sobbing into a scratchy pillow for what must have been hours. My eyes were puffy by the time I was done. I couldn't fathom falling asleep in a state like that, but I must have at some point, because the next thing I remember, sunlight was flooding through the blinds. Morning, babe. How'd you... The rest of the sentence caught in my throat. That was right. Justin and I were about to be over. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, tears stinging at the corners of my vision. I opened up the text I'd sent myself as proof that the past 12 hours hadn't been some twisted nightmare. But the messages were gone. My eyes grew wide as I stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. They'd been there, clear as day the night before. Something wasn't adding up. I suddenly paused, bolting upright. Was that breakfast? The tantalizing aroma of eggs and bacon wafted around the corner from the kitchen. My brows furrowed. Justin never cooked. My breathing was shallow as I tentatively shuffled toward the kitchen. Curiosity gnawed at me like a piranha. I apprehensively peeked around the corner, unsure of what I would find. To my shock, there was my husband, humming a little tune while flipping pancakes. I rubbed my eyes. Was I seeing things? Surely I was delusional from lack of sleep. That had to have been it. Then Justin turned, his icy blue eyes locking onto mine. Morning, princess. I hope you're hungry. I saw you sleeping on the couch, and I thought you might not be feeling well, so I decided to make you a hot meal to help you get better. My heart skipped a beat. Was this really my husband? It looked like him, sounded like him too. Still, I was weary. Yeah, just feeling a little under the weather is all. Are you feeling okay? You're acting different. Never been better. Honestly, I think I've really turned a new leaf, he said, placing a steaming plate before me. The old Justin is kaput. From now on, I swear, I'm going to be the best husband I can be. Our gazes connected, and I searched his expression for answers. He seemed genuine. If this was an act, it was a good one. Thanks, babe. That really makes me happy to hear. Justin beamed at me, the warmth of his smile seeping into my heart. It had been years since he looked at me like that. Well, get used to it, because I'm keeping my word. I love you, Lydia. I wanted to be suspicious. I wanted to remain silent. I wanted to keep my guard up. But how could I? All I needed was love and attention, and I was finally getting it. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my husband actually cared. I love you too, Justin, I muttered before digging into my meal. A big part of me was still leery of my husband. His timing was pretty convenient after all, but even with all my doubts, Justin was seemingly sticking to his promise. He took me out on dates, paid to get my nails done, bought me flowers. He even started shouldering most of the housework. Needless to say, I was impressed. If he would have kept that up, I might have never suspected a thing. But one night he slipped up. We were cuddled up on the couch, watching The Truman Show, when I asked. Now, I wish I would have kept my mouth shut. Hey babe. Yes, my love, Justin asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. If someone close to you was an impostor, like a perfect replica except for a few tiny changes, do you think you'd notice? Justin tensed up, his eyes wide as he slowly turned to face me. A blank stare had overtaken his expression. A chill rippled through my body when he looked at me like that. He was beginning to frighten me. I suppose so. Why do you ask? His voice was monotone, dripping with a tinge of urgency. I didn't know how to process his sudden shift in personality. It's the premise of the movie we're watching. I watched as the colors seeped back into his face, and he loosened up, breathing a sigh of relief. I cocked a curious brow. Why was he acting so strange? That makes sense. We sat there in uncomfortable silence, shifting our attention back to the TV screen. After a few more tense moments, I couldn't take it anymore. I've got to use the restroom and charge my phone. I'll be right back. No need to pause the movie for me. Justin nodded before grinning up at me. His smile, had his teeth always been that straight? Okay, baby girl, hurry back. Wouldn't want your spot to get cold. Yeah, sure thing. I practically bolted up the stairs, locking myself in our room. I slumped against the door, trying to steady my palpitating heart. What was going on? Was it just me, or was that some seriously freaky behavior? Either way, I needed a second to calm down. I had my eyes shut, focusing on my breathing when I heard it. My phone was buzzing from inside my pocket. I hurriedly retrieved it, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. I normally don't answer calls from strangers, but something compelled me. Maybe it was intuition, or perhaps I just wanted someone to talk to other than my husband. In the end, I accepted the call. Hello? Lydia Atkins speaking. Look, this is gonna sound crazy, but I need you to hear what I have to say. Okay. I suddenly jolted up from my spot on the floor and stared at the locked door separating me from the hallway. Loud knocks rattled it in its frame. Lydia, who are you speaking to? Panic surged through me as I scrambled for an answer. It's my mom. Go back downstairs, I'll be there in a minute. That was him, wasn't it? The caller said. That was my husband, yes. Why do you ask? I whispered, putting as much distance between myself and the door as possible. Lydia, I need you to hear me out. Can you promise me that you will? The pounding on the opposite side of the room grew even louder. Lydia, don't listen to her. She's a liar. My stomach began to twist itself into knots. How did he know? I'm listening. I'll hear what you have to say. The woman on the other end of the line breathed an audible sigh of relief. Okay, my name is Adeline, and Justin and I have been seeing each other for about 9 months. That man in your house is not your husband. My blood turned to ice and I began to tremble. Number? That couldn't be true. In a shaky voice, I asked the question that will haunt me until I die. How do I know you're telling the truth? There was a long pause, the bangs outside my door reaching a nauseating crescendo. When Adeline answered, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was in serious danger. Lydia, for the past week, Justin has been living with me. Adeline, if that's not my husband, then who is it? I tried to be calm, to think rationally, but Adeline must have picked up on the fear in my tone. Look, I don't know, but try to get out of the house if you can. I'm going to send you my address, and I'll explain everything in person. I have to go, I'm sorry. The line went dead. All the while, the hammering continued to escalate. "Lydia, unlock this stupid door. I swear, if I have to break this thing down, I will." Those words sent a chill down my spine. Justin had only raised his voice at me a handful of times in the decade that I'd known him, and none of them were as threatening as that. I stood there, momentarily stunned, but a hard kick from the other side of the door was all I needed to spur me to move. I snatched my keys from the bedside table and raced to the window overlooking the front lawn. I hurriedly unlocked it and began to pull. "Come on, you piece of crap. Open," I muttered, a massive surge of adrenaline aiding my efforts. With one final heave, the window gave way, and not a moment too soon. The door began to splinter and crack. A few more hearty blows and it was done for. I didn't have any time to waste. I punched out the screen, watching it tumble onto the shingles below. I took a deep breath before hoisting myself onto the roof. I had one leg out the window when it happened. Whoever or whatever was pretending to be my husband finally managed to get inside. My eyes grew wide as he charged toward me. "Lydia, don't do this, I can explain." I didn't want to hear what he had to say. Maybe that was stupid of me. Maybe I should have stayed and talked things out. But in that moment, Adeline's words kept surfacing to the forefront of my mind. Now, I can only pray that I made the right choice. I pulled myself the remainder of the way out and slid down the roof, desperate to escape my pursuer. I yelped as I felt fingernails graze my arm. My heart jackhammered in my chest as I fell onto the grass. I scrambled to my feet, somehow unscathed aside from a few minor scratches, and bolted to my car. I flung open the door, threw myself inside, and jammed the keys into the ignition. Before I peeled out of the driveway, I briefly glanced up. Justin's lookalike was standing in the window, glowering at me. A devastating sense of dread consumed me as our eyes locked. That's what terrified me the most. His eyes. They were burning with rage, but something about them felt wrong. In fact, his entire face looked off, like he was trying to express an intense emotion, but he didn't quite know how. That instantly destroyed any qualms I had about leaving. I slammed the car into reverse and floored it. I briefly looked back as I sped away, and my stomach twisted itself into knots when I did. The window was empty. I was a wreck the whole way to Adeline's. An overwhelming flood of confusion, resentment, and fear swirled within me as the realization sank in. Justin really had cheated on me, and on top of that, he was leaving me for his mistress. It was all too much to process. I flew down the empty streets, tears trickling down my face. How did this happen? Why me? Why couldn't I have normal marital problems like leaving the milk out or arguing over whose turn it was to do the dishes? I didn't ask for any of this. It wasn't fair. Fortunately, I didn't have much time to think about it. Thanks to my erratic driving, I made it to Adeline's place, if you could even call it that, in 10 minutes flat. I quickly parked beside the curb and stepped out. I gazed in bewilderment at the rundown shack as I made my way to the door. The house was tiny compared to ours. Faded yellow paint peeled off the exterior, the shutters clung on for dear life, and empty beer bottles littered the front lawn. I'd be lying if I said it didn't give me a little glint of satisfaction. I took a deep breath as I approached the door. Was I really going through with this? How did I know that Adeline was even telling the truth? Maybe I shouldn't have come. Before I had a chance to mull over any of those thoughts, the door swung open. A young woman at least 5 years younger than me stood in the doorway. As much as it pains me to admit it, she was beautiful. Long blonde hair flowed down to her waist, and ocean blue eyes stared into mine. She was a stark contrast to me in every way. "Lydia, come in," I smack. I slapped Adeline hard across the face, leaving an angry red imprint on her cheek. "Sorry, knee-jerk reaction." She nodded, staring down at her feet. "No, I deserve that. Come in, we've got a lot to talk about." I obliged, following her lead. The inside of the home wasn't much better than the outside. Empty takeout containers were strewn about the floor. The carpet was stained with God knows what, and the whole place smelled like cigarette smoke. It took everything in me not to throw up. Adeline rushed to the couch, brushing away some stale potato chips from one of the cushions. "Sorry about the mess. You can have a seat if you want." One glance at that food-crusted sofa, and I instantly knew my answer. Thanks, but I think I'll stand." "If you say so," Adeline shrugged, claiming the spot for herself. "I guess I've got some explaining to do, huh?" "You sure do." Adeline again shifted her gaze to the floor before meeting my stare. "Look, I'm really sorry about Justin. I'm not gonna sit here and try to make up some terrible excuse. I'm a terrible person." I folded my arms across my chest. "You're not wrong. Is he here right now? You're at fault too, but Justin's the one I'm really pissed at." No, he's at the bar. He said he had some drinking to do. Lydia, I really am sorry. I know I can't make it up to you, but I held up my hand to stop her. As much as I'd love to berate you and listen to you suck up to me the whole night, that's not why I came. I've got bigger problems to worry about. How did you know about whatever took Justin's place? Adeline bit her lip, twirling a few strands of hair between her fingers. So tonight I went with Justin to get some of his things from y'all's house. He said you usually took a bath around that time, so he was just going to get in and get out before you noticed. But that thing, whatever it is, it met him at the door before he could go inside. I saw them arguing, then Justin walked back to the truck, pale as a ghost. He dropped me back off here without a single word. After I saw that, I knew I had to warn you. I made Justin give me your number, and I called you right when I got home. I nodded, soaking in her revelation. That makes sense. I was wondering how you got my info, but I still have so many questions. What is this thing, and how did it manage to replace my husband? I mean, it's even got the same truck as he does. How is that possible? Adeline pursed her lips. I don't know. I wish I had more answers for you. But Lydia, you have to listen to me. Whatever we're dealing with, I don't think it has good intentions. Watch this. It'll prove that I'm telling the truth, she said, pulling up a video on her phone. I leaned in to get a better look. The video was of Justin. He was standing on our front porch talking to himself. I could tell right away that the one facing the camera was the fake. It was too perfect. All its features were too smooth. I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed it before. The longer I watched, the more uneasy I felt. As the conversation progressed, I could tell that the real Justin was getting heated. There was no audio, but I could see him getting visibly more angry, even with his back turned. Until it happened. The imposter's face began to twist and contort in unnatural ways. It was as if someone was molding clay with an invisible hand. And that's where the video ended. The sight of it disturbed me on a primal level. My stomach churned and my head began to spin. I seriously thought I was going to be sick. That's why I had to tell you, I couldn't just sit by and let that monster hurt ye. A loud pounding against the front door cut Adeline off. Lydia, are you in there? I just want to talk. Adeline and I shared a terrified glance. This couldn't be happening. How had he tracked me down? Follow me, I'll take you out the back. You parked on the street, right? Adeline whispered, leaping from the couch. Yeah, but how do I get around him? Won't he catch me if I make a break for it? Adeline met my gaze, a fiery determination gleaming in her eyes. I'll distract him, it's the least I can do. Good luck, she said, ushering me outside. The door clicked shut before I had a chance to thank her. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and without giving myself time to freak out, I raced to my car. I squeezed my keys with a vice grip as I ran, the world around me devolving into a blur of colors. I didn't even spare a glance at the front porch as I flew past. I was too focused on making it off that property alive. I was mere inches from the safety of my car. I was so close. But then I heard it. Lydia, why are you running? Come on, don't be like this. I fumbled with the keys and scrambled to hop into my car. Justin 2.0 sprinted toward me at an inhuman speed. Behind him, the door to the house was hanging wide open, and Adeline was nowhere to be found. I hurriedly turned my attention back to the steering wheel. I slammed on the gas, my tires squealing as I sped away. I glanced in the rearview mirror and my heart nearly stopped. The false Justin was standing beneath a street lamp. I don't know if it was my nerves or maybe the poor lighting, but I could have sworn that when I looked back, he was smiling, and for a moment I was sure that I saw blood dribbling down his chin. I hyperventilated, tears flooding down my cheeks as I sped away. Once I was satisfied with the amount of distance I put between myself and Justin's doppelganger, I rolled into a gas station and parked at one of the pumps. I felt so lost, so confused. What the hell had just happened? Why did this thing want to track me down so badly? And Adeline, what had he done to her? I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to that question. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my palpitating heart. It's going to be okay, just calm down and come up with a game plan. It'll all be over soon, I muttered, staring reassuringly at myself in the rearview mirror. I didn't truly believe that, but I had to do something. I couldn't afford to keep crying my eyes out and waiting there like a sitting duck. I needed a plan, so I did the only thing I could think to do. I hopped out of my car and prepaid for gas. My head was on a swivel as I inserted the nozzle of the tank. The gas station was desolate, save for an older gentleman smoking a cigarette by the front door. My foot tapped against the concrete as the fuel gauge slowly ticked up. My heart pounded like a jackhammer the entire time, just waiting to see that familiar red truck pulling in beside me. But it never did. I breathed a sigh of relief, placing the fuel pump back into its compartment. I glanced back at the man by the door for a split second before jumping back into the driver's seat. He was talking on the phone now, and was he grinning at me? I didn't want to wait to figure out what he was planning. I zipped down the road and onto the interstate. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I needed to get far away from my husband's look-alike. Once I was on the open road and all the fear had begun to dissipate, it hit me. Everything. The cheating, the lies, the betrayal, all of it. It all crashed down on me like a tidal wave. What hurt the most was the false sense of security I was lulled into. I had let myself believe that Justin had changed, that he turned a new leaf with no provocation whatsoever. The thought that all that time, none of the love I'd been given was even real. It shattered my heart all over again. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried. I sobbed uncontrollably as I continued down sparsely populated roads. I didn't want to be on the run from some unknown entity. I wanted to go back home and take a nice warm bath, but I knew I couldn't do that. I had been driving for a little over 3.5 hours before I started to get low on fuel again. I pulled off on the nearest exit. By that point, the adrenaline had worn off and I was starting to get tired. I soon found myself at a rundown Motel 6 in the middle of nowhere, Egypt. The red and blue sign flickered as I pulled into the parking lot, a great indicator of the quality of the room I'd be staying in. I took a deep breath and looked at myself in the mirror. "Come on, Lydia, you can do this," I murmured, stepping out of the car. My eyes darted from left to right as I made my way to check in. My BMW looked so out of place beside all the rusted clunkers sprinkled throughout the lot. I picked up my pace, my heart rate spiking. A bell chimed as I opened the door to retrieve my key. A young man with black, greasy hair sat behind the counter, reading a Playboy magazine. He didn't even look up as I approached. Hi, can I get a room?" The boy lazily glanced up at me before releasing a sigh. "Sure, $50. I pursed my lips as I fished around in my wallet. $50 a night for this dump, what a ripoff. I slapped the cash onto the counter, thanking my lucky stars that I wouldn't have to risk getting my bank information stolen from their card reader. The boy, whose name tag read Steven, handed me the key for room number 12 before pocketing the cash. "Thanks," I said, shooting him a glare as I snatched the keys. He gave me a slight nod before returning to his magazine. I nearly sprinted to room 12. I hurriedly jammed the key into the lock before shoving the door open. Right as I was closing it, something caught my eye. Headlights. I kept the door cracked just enough to see. Silly, right? Surely I was just being paranoid. There was no way that it was him. Justin's truck cruised into the parking lot. It was unmistakable. The faded red paint, the dent on the driver's side door, the crack running down the entirety of the windshield. It was all there. I quietly locked myself in the room, my head spinning. How was this happening? I was so far from home. How had he found me again? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. How stupid could I possibly be? The answer was so simple. I pulled out my phone and there it was. Justin and I were sharing our locations. With everything that had happened, I hadn't even thought to turn it off. I knew it was too late, but I turned off location services anyway. I felt nauseous as I placed my phone back in my pocket. How accurate was that thing? Did the doppelganger know what room I was in? Morbid curiosity got the best of me. I had to know. With a shaky hand, I brushed back the blinds to my window. The second I did, tears began to trickle down my cheeks, and my blood turned to ice. He was outside. Justin's impersonator was standing directly outside my window. His eyes were wide and manic. The grin he wore looked off, like it was too big for his face. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. The fake Justin walked up to the glass and paused for just a moment. The silence was so deafening that the only audible noise was the blood pumping in my ears. And then he moved. His tongue lolled out of his mouth and he slapped it against the glass with a wet thump. He dragged it upward, those inhuman eyes never breaking contact with mine. "I found you. It's time to stop running and let me in." His smile vanished as he gritted out those words. That was enough to snap me from my stupor. I let the blinds fall over the window and stumbled backward, nearly crashing into a table. That's where I am now, writing this at that table. I'm done for. It's only a matter of time before he breaks in. I phoned the front desk, but no one answered. I called the police too, but response times are slow this far out in the boonies. This will most likely be my final update. If the cops don't show up on time, I don't know what he'll do to me. My hands are trembling as I type this. He's trying to kick the door down, and I don't think it's gonna hold. To anyone reading this, please listen to me. If you notice a sudden change in a loved one's personality, don't brush it off, because it just might be this thing wearing their face. At first, I thought it was fun. We lived in an RV. It was like an endless vacation. One week we were in LA, the next we were in Salt Lake City. We didn't know much about our lives before this. We knew we were born in Portland and that we could never stop moving. We always knew we were a special family. I just guess we didn't know how special we were. My parents tried so hard to have kids and almost lost hope. That's why my twin sister and I were so special to them. They're little miracles. It was annoying, but at least we knew we meant something to them. Amelia and I were fairly close as far as siblings go. We were kind of each other's only friends since we were homeschooled. We felt pretty isolated. We never set up camp anywhere fun. No KOA campgrounds with ice cream shops and swimming pools. Always driving off-road and living deep in the woods. I guess it was peaceful in a way, but anyone who grew up near the woods understand it's not something you mess with. The first time I really personally realized something was up was just before our 7th birthday, when we were staying in a place in BC called Kamloops. We weren't supposed to sneak out or leave mom and dad's sight, but at the time, we were mischievous 6-year-olds with a huge unexplored forest in front of us. What do you expect? We waited until they fell asleep for the night and snuck out of the RV through the window, which was easy because the window was just a sheet of plastic held together by a zipper, and we set off with nothing but a crappy lantern to illuminate the path in front of us. It wasn't long before we saw something strange, a glow, not from our lantern, it was coming from in front of us. It didn't take long for us to see who or what was in front of us. It was a lady holding a small homemade torch, but she didn't look much like a lady. Her hair was matted and fallen out in some places, her skin was almost blue and looked rotted. Her teeth were yellow and a few were missing, and I thought you could even see part of her jaw. She was wearing a dirty hospital gown. I didn't know where the nearest hospital was, but it had to be pretty far, because the last time I remember driving anywhere with a paved road had to be 3 hours before we set up our camp here. Amelia and I were frozen in fear, and for the first time since we had mutually decided affection towards siblings was lame, I reached for her hand. That thing reached out its bony arm to us. It moaned something almost indecipherable, like muh-buh-buh. That was enough to snap me out of it, and I sprinted away, dragging Amelia behind me. By some miracle, we had made it back to the RV, and by some other miracle, got back in without waking our parents. We didn't get much sleep, and were far too shaken up to even say good morning to our parents, let alone tell them what happened. Would they have even believed us if we told them? Well, after what happened next, I guess they would have to. When we opened the door to the RV, we saw that the remains of what we had left out overnight, a campfire reduced to ashes, the sticks covered in charcoal Amelia and I had used to draw on the rocks, and a makeshift table with a few cans of beans had been utterly destroyed. It wasn't too out of the ordinary to have our camp ravished by animals. We lived in the woods after all, but this was something no animal could do. This looked set up like whatever did it had a plan. What we saw written on the back of the RV confirmed this belief. In the charcoal sticks, someone had written, "You can't run forever," on our trailer. Mom made us breakfast while Dad cleaned up the mess. We left shortly after that and drove for hours, not even stopping for quick washroom breaks. Mom and Dad spoke in hushed whispers as Dad drove. I wish I knew what they had been talking about. That night, I guess because Mom and Dad could see we were shaken up, they took us for a rare treat, a dinner at a real restaurant. A crappy diner, but a restaurant nonetheless. It was empty there, which was why my parents liked it, as they hated crowds. I was over the moon. A root beer float and a greasy cheeseburger was anything a 6-year-old boy could dream of, which was why I was so upset when Mom and Dad made us leave the second someone else came in. It was just an old trucker, I didn't get the big deal. While we were in the RV, Amelia asked why we had to leave while I sulked in my bunk, a glorified shelf. Mom sighed. "I suppose you two are almost 7, that's old enough to know." "Well, Zachary, Amelia, the reason we had to leave is because we're scared of losing you. Do you remember what happened when you were 4? I had no idea, my memory was never good, but Amelia claimed to remember. We were in Beaverton, not too far from Portland. She said that when we were 4, we were running around in a field, when a big man in camouflage and bit boots came up to us and bent down to our level. We're not supposed to talk to strangers, Amelia said. She was always a goody two-shoes. I'm John, now we're not strangers. What are your names? I'm Zach, and that's my sister Amelia. We're 4 and our birthday is July 26, 2002. I had apparently said, but I bet Amelia just said I said that to make me look worse. That's when he stopped smiling. He roughly took our hands and started to lead us away. Let's go somewhere fun, Zach and Amelia. I need to take you someplace else. My mom got teary. That's right, if your dad and I hadn't caught you just before you left, we probably would have never seen you again. I took you to someplace safe, and your dad, well, your dad. I shot that guy in the leg, hope he had fun crawling back to his house, he said coldly. Amelia and I shot each other glances. Okay, Daddy, I'm going to go to sleep now, she said, climbing over me to get to her bunk. That night we stopped somewhere for the night. I forgot where, probably near the interior of BC or maybe Alberta. I looked out the little plastic window and I saw her. I saw that lady again. She was staring at me and Amelia in our bunk beds, reaching out for us with that same long, bony hand. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but couldn't, knowing she was there. Life continued on like that for a while. Anywhere we'd stop, she'd be there. Washington, there she was. Nevada, you bet yourself. Montana, better believe it. Amelia and I didn't really explore much anymore, partially because we were getting older and gradually showing less interest in that sort of thing, but partially because that experience in Kamloops traumatized us both. That didn't stop the lady from trying to get us. Sometimes we'd catch a glimpse of her on the highway as we drove by. Sometimes she'd appear right where the fire of our campsite stopped illuminating, so we could barely see her. On the rare occasion we went into public to get supplies or food, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of her in the crowd. Whenever she was around, I always heard that cry of hers. After a while, she stopped scaring me. Well, as much. Everything finally made sense. The day before Amelia and I turned 14, Mom and Dad had left the RV and gave us two a rare couple hours of freedom as they gathered things for our birthday. We weren't parked ridiculously far from civilization, but I'd say a good hour's worth of walking. We weren't that scared. We had lived in the woods long enough to know as long as you didn't bother the forest, it wouldn't bother you, and the lady in the hospital gown was honestly more of an annoyance than anything else. I'd even go so far to say we had almost forgotten about her. I was reading and Amelia was rummaging around the RV for food. I was getting immersed in my book when Amelia shouted out, "Zach, come check this out." I rolled my eyes. What could it be? We had lived in this tiny RV for almost 14 years. I knew it like the back of my hand. There was absolutely no nook or cranny I didn't know about. Oh, I guess I was wrong. There, under the driver's seat cushion Amelia had pulled out, for some reason, was a box. It was small and a bit squished from all the years of my dad's butt sitting on it, but we could still tell what it was. Amelia excitedly reached to open it. Inside were papers. Forget about it, Amelia. It's probably just boring documents for work, I said, but the look of confusion to horror on my sister's face was enough to change my mind. They were documents, but not for work. Birth documents, for us. But the stated parents weren't ours. I was apparently Zachary Jr., but nobody in my family was named Zachary. I looked at the father's name, Zachary. The mother was someone named Emily. Maybe we were adopted, I suggested. Amelia reached in and pulled out another sheet of paper. She shook her head and held out the next one for me with a shaky hand. Infants missing from Portland Hospital. July 27th, 2002. Twins, Zachary Christopher Clark Jotter and Amelia Emily Clark. Ongoing search. Anyone with information is to report it to the police immediately. Clark, Christopher, those weren't our names. Our last name was Brown, and our parents certainly weren't Zachary and Emily. They were Ginny and Kevin. I had a feeling things were going to get worse. I was right, as Amelia pulled out the third and second to last paper. Portland mother of two murdered in hospital. Emily Clark, 27, had recently given birth to twins, now missing, when she was smothered to death in her own hospital bed. Police drawing of suspects. We looked at the police drawing. It was obviously not a complete match, but they were basically the only other two faces we had seen our entire lives. Mom and Dad. CCTV footage shows the two suspects leaving the hospital through a back door with the two infants. Search is ongoing. If spotted, do not approach these individuals. Alert the authorities immediately. We were silent as Amelia shakily grabbed the last piece of paper. This was from 2006. We were 4. After an Oregon man allegedly spotted the missing kids and was attacked by the perpetrators, a glimpse of hope is seen in this 4-year-long cold case. Father and husband of the victims, Zachary Clark, shares this message. "To my babies, I have no idea where you two are, but I will never let go of hope that one day I will see your beautiful faces again. You may not even know who I am, but that doesn't change anything. Until we meet again, Daddy loves you." We couldn't even say anything. What do you even say to that? We just stood in silence for a while. Then we heard a banging on the RV. We jumped and looked outside. It was the lady in the hospital gown, closer than ever. We could see her bluish gray gray skin. We could see her hazel eyes. They kind of looked like Amelia's. She moaned, reaching out for us again. I looked down to the newspaper clipping. It had a picture of the victim on it. I held it up to the window where she was staring at us. My baby, all this time. She had just wanted her babies. Amelia stepped out of the RV. I was scared at first, but this day couldn't get any crazier, so I followed. Mama, she asked, tears in her eyes. Bye, she said, reaching her bony hand out once again, but she didn't run. She let her touch her face as she gently rubbed her hand across her cheek. She did the same to me, but then pointed in the direction of the nearest town. Go, she said. Go? Why? Amelia asked. Dad, our mother croaked. Dad, Zachary Sr. Was he still alive after all this time? We have 2 hours until Mom and Dad. Amelia cut herself off. They get back. Let's go. Quick. Although we really didn't have any idea how to get to the town, we somehow knew. Like someone was guiding us. We busted into the sheriff's office, probably looking awful. First came the questioning, then the DNA testing, then they looked for our parents. Then they arrested my parents. Then the news stories and the interviews. Then we were flown out in a plane, my first plane ever, to Portland, to meet our dad. We were quite the story. They called my parents the wretches of the woods. They thought of them as evil witches who stole us and hid us deep in the woods. I guess they were right in a way. It was weird seeing them behind bars, serving life sentences, because after all, they raised us for nearly 14 years. But that's where they'll stay. No running, no hiding. There's nowhere to hide in a cell. He burst into tears when he saw us. We didn't. It was weird. He was my dad and all, but was he? I mean, I guess I met him when I was like a few hours old, but I just couldn't connect to him. It took a while, but we slowly got used to our new lives. In a house with a bed and our own rooms, not running from everything or living in the woods. It was peaceful, although most of the time I ended up sneaking into Amelia's room because after all this time I still couldn't be alone. One time I got a knock on our window. We both woke up and saw the lady in the hospital gown outside, but she looked happier, less rotten, like she was complete again. Mama, I asked, could she stay, and I could live with the family I craved. Like she read my mind, she shook her head. I have to go, my babies, she said, reaching her hand out to us through the window as she slowly disappeared into the night. We never saw her again after that, but we always knew she was watching us. But this time, we wouldn't run.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.